Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, at the Arizona Cardinals NFL Wire site from the USA Today Sports Media Group. And we are in the middle of our opponent preview series as I have as we have our week 7 opponent, the Green Bay Packers. The Cardinals will face them at on the road, actually at home at State Farm Stadium in week 7, playing the Packers for the second year in a row after the Packers beat the pants off of them last season. Joining me to talk about the Packers, to give us that preview, is Mark Oldacres from the one of the contributing writers over at Packers Wire, our sister site. Mark, glad to have you on. How you been?
Yeah, I've been good. Good to talk to you. Looking forward to the season. Still feels like a long way away. Especially to be thinking about even week 7 right now. Feels a long way away, but glad to be getting closer and to talk some football with you. So I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. And what we'll do on this show is we have in the previous ones and the ones that have still coming up, we will look back at the Packers 2024 season. We will go over their offseason, what they gained and lost in free agency, their draft picks, and then kind of look ahead at their 2025 season and what their expectations are. So we go back to last year. They have another solid year. They make the playoffs. They're 11-6, but playing in a very difficult NFC North, they finish in 3rd place, and lost to the last 2 games of the season. And then lost in the wild card round to the eventual world champion Philadelphia Eagles in the playoffs. Can you tell us what last season, the 11 wins, the playoff berth, did it meet? Did it exceed? Did it fall short of expectations people had?
I think that's a really complex question because I think on the face of it, the team did progress from the previous year in terms of record. Obviously, won 2 more games and were kind of a more consistent product week to week, much more than in 2023, which was obviously the first year of the kind of Jordan Love era. But the way the season ended kind of colors the perception of the season as a whole. Obviously, with the 2 straight losses to end the regular season, that the Bears loss was kind of a mess. The last game they went 1-5 in the division. And then obviously they dumped out the playoffs in the first week by the Eagles, and the offense really couldn't get anything going that game. So I think on the face of it, you kind of have to look at the record and kind of the statistics, and you would say this was a better team than in 2023. But because the expectations at the end of 2023 were so high with the kind of run they were on, and then they kind of destroyed the Cowboys in the wild round at the end of 2023. The expectations were so high going into 2024 that I think by the time the season kind of ended in January, it's kind of hard to say that they met the expectations because it kind of felt like a deflation.
Jordan Love, in his second season as a starter, went 9-6 as a starter, almost 3,400 yards. He did miss a pair of games, threw 25 touchdown passes, 11 interceptions. How was Jordan Love in his second year as a starter? Because in his first year in 2023, it was kind of rocky, and then the end of the year, he just completely took off and looked like a star. What were your thoughts on how Jordan Love played last season?
Yeah, this is something that's kind of been a big topic of conversation recently in the Packers kind of sphere, and that's, again, it's another one of these complicated issues because on the face of it, statistically, he was not as good in 2024 as he was in 2023. 23, though, it's easy to remember the first half of the easy to forget, I should say, the first half of the year was not very good, very up and down. At mid-season, when I think the Packers were at one point maybe 2-6 or 2-5, somewhere in there, and there were questions about whether it was going to happen for him. And then the end of 2023 was so strong. He played like one of the best quarterbacks in the league for the last 8 weeks and into the playoffs, which is obviously a significant stretch of time. And then 2024 rolls around, and I think it's very difficult to evaluate that season because he was injured in the first game in Brazil, a knee injury which he dealt with for weeks. Obviously, as you said, he missed a couple games, and then even when he came back, it was clearly still bothering him. He wasn't anywhere near as mobile as he had been. And then there were some flaws kind of that popped back up in his game as he dealt with that injury. Just as he kind of got healthy again, he then gets injured again. He injured his groin in Jacksonville, had to come out of that game. Malik Willis finished that game. And then even in the final regular season game, he injured, I believe it was his elbow. He hit it off a Bears player's helmet. So then going into the Eagles game, he's still not healthy. So it's very difficult to truly evaluate. I think if you asked him, he's probably very proud of how he navigated last season and how successful the Packers offense was as a whole, despite how compromised he was for most of the season. But again, on the face of it, statistically, it wasn't as good, and it needs to be better this year. But the kind of hope for Packers fans is, well, it should be, because last year, from the get-go, he was just never really able to get into a rhythm.
Well, interestingly enough, like you saw, like what happened in 2023, he went on a kind of a run where he did not turn the ball over. He did not turn over the ball over after week 11. So from week 12 on, he had 9 touchdown passes and 0 interceptions until they got to the playoffs, when he threw 3 picks against the Eagles. Although something like the Eagles rolled their way to the Super Bowl win. Isn't it Jordan Love that has the crazy Toyotathon stat that once Toyotathon starts, he's a franchise quarterback? Before and after it, not so much.
Yeah, it does seem that has definitely become some kind of folklore, within the Packers community. Absolutely. And the funny thing is about this is it becomes so strong and so almost undeniable. And then the second he got an actual paid partnership with Toyota, and they started kind of actually putting it out there, it ended. It seemed to, and I joked that would happen. I said, the second Toyota acknowledges that this is a thing, and Jordan Love acknowledges that this is a thing, it's going to end, isn't it? And I was kind of joking around, but it kind of did happen. His stats after that did really kind of tail off, but I'm sure it's all coincidence. Obviously, it's all just good fun. But no, both years in a row, he kind of did get on a hot streak, in the back half of the season. So yeah, it has been an interesting phenomenon for sure.
We're a top 5 offense in both yards on both offense and defense. They were top 10 unit both in offense and defense in terms of points allowed. What was good? What was not? What was good, and what was perhaps not as good, both on offense and defense last season?
Yeah, I think on offense, I think really this is probably, last year was a real feather in the cap, I think, of Matt LaFleur and the coaching job that he did to manufacture, to create not only a functional but an explosive offense week to week, despite the issues that he dealt with 2.5 games with Malik Willis. The first 2 of those games were after he'd been in the building, I believe, less than 2 weeks, and they just completely crafted a new offense and won both games, put up a lot of points. Josh Jacobs obviously made a huge difference coming in, taking over from Aaron Jones, which was big shoes to fill going into 2024. And he was everything they could have hoped for in his first season. And he did not really work with the best run blocking either. That has been a factor, and he made it work. He made magic, game after game, really. And he was another one that, as the season went on, he just got better and better. So on the offensive side, that was kind of the pros of it. The cons was kind of just maybe a lack of consistency in terms of when Love was in there. Almost, I think when Willis was in there, you kind of knew what they were going to be. Like, the offense was what it was, but when Love was in there, they seemed to struggle to kind of find what their identity was going to be. I think almost the shift to Willis and then back to Love, they kind of lost a little bit of what the Packers offense is. And then obviously the offense really did struggle in kind of some of the bigger games against the NFC North teams, against the Lions, against the Vikings. They just took far too long to get into gear, and the game was kind of away from them by that point. On the defensive side, it was a really promising year. New defensive coordinator last year, Jeff Hafley, who they brought in from Boston College, and he kind of immediately proved that to be the correct decision. I think he's already got some attention in terms of head coaching interviews this last offseason, and they might only have one more season with him because he did such a good job. And like LaFleur did, he kind of worked with one hand tied behind his back in some ways, because the pass rush, when they rushed four, just the standard four, was really not there last year. Rashawn Gary was not quite as dominant as he'd been in previous years. Kenny Clark played with an injury the entire year, which he recently revealed. He also was injured in week 1 and played through it the entire year. It was the worst year of his career. Lucas Van Ness, former first-round pick, couldn't even get on the field at times. So the front four wasn't really getting there by themselves. He had to, use a lot of simulated pressures, stunts, things like that to get pressure. And they were still in the top 8 in the league in sacks. And on the back end, they defended the pass very well, despite Jair Alexander, who's now not on the team anymore, missing a bunch of games again. So I think kind of given the ingredients they were working with on defense, the product that they put out was really, really promising. But to take it to that next level, the pass rush kind of from your guys that, you've made heavy investments in has to be better.
Then you look at individuals, Xavier McKinney making the Pro Bowl, being first team All-Team, 8 interceptions on the season, 11 pass breakups. How good was he last year?
Yeah, he was exceptional, and once again, like Josh Jacobs, just everything they could have kind of looked for when you bring him in. It was kind of stunning, really, that he was allowed. I mean, the Giants in one off season let Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney both hit free agency, and those decisions aren't looking too good right now. And McKinney, he's coming off two fantastic years in New York. I think he was 24 or 25 years old hitting free agency, and it was interesting because kind of the Packers knew, and the whole Packers content creation, sphere knew that the back end, that the safety room had to be completely reworked. And McKinney was kind of the one that it just made the most sense on paper. It was like, just throw money at this guy and please get him to come and kind of be the cornerstone of that group. But you kind of think, well, there's going to be a lot of teams interested. How realistically is it going to happen? And they made it happen. They paid the highest. They made the highest bid to get him. I believe they got him with the Eagles, and he was fantastic. Especially in the first half of the year. That was kind of when more of the ball production was there. I think in the second half of the year, teams kind of stopped throwing his way because just nothing good was happening when they did. So I think he was kind of less effective in that sense as the season went on. But yeah, he's been a massive addition for the defense. He was arguably the best player that they had on defense last season, and that's going to need to continue to be the case.
Offensively, something real interesting about the production. They were great at running the ball, obviously behind the play of Josh Jacobs, but in the passing game was interesting is that the Packers did not have a single 900-yard receiver and did not have a guy that even got more than 55 receptions. Is that a sustainable thing offensively? I know that's kind of the second year in a row they went with pick your poison, but is that something of concern?
I think the only concerning element is not that they seem to want to run this kind of equal opportunities passing offense where anybody can get the ball. It's more that last season the receivers just let the quarterback down way too often. In 2023, it worked. It worked. They made the playoffs. They put up a lot of points on the Cowboys and on the 49ers in the playoffs, and they were spreading the ball around, and you didn't know who was going to get it. They've got multiple receivers they trust, a couple of tight ends that they trust. But in 2024, arguably the biggest issue that they had on offense was just the drops from the receivers. It was across the board. It was almost unbelievable on a weekly basis. Dontavian Wicks was kind of believe he had maybe the worst drop rate in the entire league. which is something he had struggled with in the past, but it wasn't as bad in 2023 in his rookie year. But Jaden Reed, who'd been so reliable in 2023, dropped a lot of passes as well. Even Romeo Dobbs, who's a very trustworthy receiver for Jordan Love, he wasn't, as clean in that area in 2024. And some of the numbers that have come out about the production lost for Jordan Love on third down and just in general, purely down to receiver error, are kind of a bit startling. So obviously, as we'll get to, they responded by drafting 2 receivers in the first 3 rounds in this draft. But I do believe the talent is not an issue at receiver. And if they want to spread the ball around, that's absolutely fine. I don't think they need a quote number 1 wide receiver. I don't think that element is going to slow them down. But the receivers they have just have to be more trustworthy and make plays that they've shown they can in the past. It's not like they're taking a blind leap of faith. It's just they have to get back to where they were.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move to the offseason, what the Green Bay did in free agency, players they lost, players they gained, and the NFL draft. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sierra. We're back in the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the Best of Cardinals talk on the web, as we do our opponent preview show about the Green Bay Packers, whom the Cardinals host in Week 7. Mark Oldacres from Packers Wire is Mark Oldacres, instead of Mark Goldacres. Mark Oldacres is with me. In free agency, the Packers traditionally are not super active in free agency. They prefer to draft and grow theirs. They didn't lose a ton. Obviously, Jair Alexander was the big one because he was released. TJ Slayton, you probably could argue, might have been one of the bigger losses. He signs with the Bengals. Other than that, the guys that left were didn't get big contracts. Eric Stokes signs a 1-year, $3.5 million deal with the Raiders. Eric Wilson, linebacker, signs with the Vikings, 1-year, $2 million. Running back AJ Dillon gets a 1-year deal worth almost $1.4 million. So nothing major in the free agency. And with the guys that were lost, like Corey Valentine goes to the Colts. Who are the most impactful losses, do you feel?
Yeah, I really don't think they're going to lose too much. I think that's probably one of the benefits of how this team has been built over the last few years, and the amount of draft picks they've been able to make and the successful draft picks that they've made. And they've built such a young team that you kind of knew going into this offseason, the guys who were going to walk, you knew they were going to walk, that they probably weren't really going to get re-signed by Green Bay. And if they did, it wouldn't be for very much money. I mean, Eric Stokes was arguably their worst defender last year. Josh Myers has probably been their worst offensive lineman, even though he's been the center and he's probably been given too long of a leash. So those aren't massive losses. TJ Slayton is a real presence in terms of his kind of run stuffing ability. He's kind of the only real body type that they had in terms of a true nose tackle build. So that is an interesting decision to let him go. He didn't sign for too much in Cincinnati, although I do think he's a good player. It may speak to kind of a defensive shift because, under Jeff Hafley, they kind of made a shift more towards penetrating, getting up the field rather than two-gapping and trying to plug. So maybe they felt they just don't need that kind of body type, or they just felt, they wanted to go in another direction, whatever it was. Jair Alexander is obviously the big one. I was personally a proponent for making it work and bringing him back for 1 more year. I thought that, could have been something done there in terms of the contract. And we saw I believe he was set to make, over 17 million in Green Bay, and he signs for very little in Baltimore. So obviously that could have been achieved theoretically in Green Bay. I thought it was worth the risk because the defensive backfield without him is something of an unknown. They would argue they've basically played without him most of the time. I think he's played half the games in the last 3 seasons, which obviously isn't good enough. It's not his fault, but it's not what you want. So they decide to move on there. That could be a big loss, and that is probably the only area where they are setting themselves up for, in a year's time, people sitting here and saying, how could they have not seen that would really impact them? They might be right in letting him go, but it is something of a risk.
What they gained, they spent big on 2 deals, and that was acquiring former San Francisco 49ers offensive lineman Aaron Banks. Big deal, 4 years, $77 million. And then they took care of the cornerback position before letting go of Alexander, getting Nate Hobbs at nearly the same price. 3 years, 48 million, so 16 average. $16 million per year average. They had a couple of smaller pieces, Mecole Hardman, who played for the Chiefs, and apparently, as we've seen before, maybe only is good or productive with the Chiefs. We'll have to see how that goes. Isaiah Simmons, former first runner for the Cardinals, Christian Welch, and then defensive tackle Cameron Young. Those were small minimum deals. How impactful will Banks and Hobbs be this coming season, do you see?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think Banks, when the deal was announced, it seemed like an awful lot of money for probably a league average guard, you would say. But that is kind of the going rate. You know, we've seen that, like the offensive lineman. If you are a serviceable offensive lineman and you hit free agency, you're going to get paid because there's just not that many of them out there. I think he will be impactful in terms of, again, you're removing essentially a weak link in Josh Myers. Elton Jenkins is going to slide to center, and then Aaron Banks is going to play at left guard. That seems to be the plan. And I think scheme-wise, he fits what they are planning to do specifically in the run game. And I think run blocking, as I kind of mentioned earlier, was not a strength of the team. And I think this offseason, in multiple ways, they've kind of made that a priority to get bigger, physically bigger and stronger on the offensive line. And I think Banks will help that. He also moves very well for a player of his size. He's obviously played in Kyle Shanahan's scheme. So it's kind of, there's a translation there between him and Matt LaFleur. So I think they envision him being a big part of what's going to improve the run game, just in terms of the blocking aspect. And then with Nate Hobbs, they see him as a very versatile player. They've made that clear. And that's something that they value in everything they do. The Packers have for a very long time. They see him being able to play not only in the slot where he has mostly and had most of his success, but also outside, which I think is going to be very important for them. I think the way they want to rotate the backfield post snap and kind of cause some confusion and not know where guys are going to end up. He had some really high moments in Vegas, and I think they're almost following the same plan that they did with Josh Jacobs, which is he's coming off not his best season or not his best couple of seasons, but can you put him in a better environment, a more stable environment than what's going on over there in Vegas? And can he thrive from that? So he's going to have to be good, Nate Hobbs. I truly believe that they've kind of shifted to almost like thinking of it as a weak link system in the defensive backfield. And I just think they want no glaring holes. They don't really care about having a cornerback one, if you will, if there's such a thing, that people are going to stay away from, but they just don't want anyone that's going to get victimized. But Hobbs is probably the leader in the clubhouse to be their best corner, and they need to be right on that one. They need to have got that move right. It's going to be very important.
Move on to the draft. The biggest move, obviously, is their first round pick, as they add arguably the guy who could be the alpha in the room, being Matthew Golden out of Texas in round one. What are the expectations for Matthew Golden entering this rookie season?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think the Packers are not the quickest to throw their rookies in, especially if they don't need to. And obviously, the situation that they're in with their receiver room, regardless of how they played last year, is that they don't need Matthew Golden really to do anything. They don't need him to be an instant starter in terms of it's not going to make or break their offense if he's not ready. But there is a scenario, by definition, he is the first receiver they've taken in the first round since 2002. So by definition, he is the best receiver prospect that they've drafted since 2002, at least in their eyes. And they've drafted some pretty good receivers in that time. So there is a world where he hits the ground running, as we've seen with receivers entering the league, first round receivers kind of more so in the last 5 to 10 years. They really have been able to just hit the ground running. There's a world where he is their best receiver as a rookie. Whether he actually gets the opportunity, the level of opportunities to truly do that, or whether he just becomes part of the mix. And early on, obviously the 4.29 speed that everybody focuses on, whether he's just used as kind of a deep threat early on with Christian Watson. He's going to be out for a chunk of the year. That was his kind of prominent role before. So it kind of has to be seen. He's going to have a role like in the offense for certain, but there is a real ceiling there that he could just explode and be kind of, the Justin Jefferson entering the league, like that level. But that's the high end outcome, and it's probably really going to land somewhere in the middle.
Golden was, I think, my favorite receiver that outside of Travis Hunter, because he was both. But Matthew Golden was a guy I love because it's not just the speed. Like they had a guy in Texas who was their speed guy, Isaiah Bond, and it was Matthew Golden who was. But you could have Golden do everything. He was the better route runner. He ran the underneath. He could do the complex things, and I'm excited to see what Golden does. You go round 2, Anthony Belton, tackle out of NC State. Does he have a spot in the lineup as a rookie, or is he going to be worked in probably year 2?
I think it's more likely going to be year 2, which it was very interesting selection of Belton. It was not somebody I expected them to take, just based on what they've done previously. I mean, there's been kind of a cottage industry built out of kind of the trends of the types of players at different positions that the Packers draft going back all the way to the 90s, because the process has been in place since then. It's just kind of passed on to the next GM. So Belton was an unusual pick for them because he's so big. I mean, he weighs upwards of 330 pounds, which for them generally is not the kind of size of offensive lineman. They prefer kind of the lighter, kind of more nimble guys. But again, I think this is a further commitment to kind of beefing up, and we have to be more physical. I think his best chance, or his only chance to crack the field as a rookie, is he's going to have to win the right guard job against Sean Ryan, who has played there sort of for the last year and a half, and has done admirably. He's a former 3rd round pick, but again, he's entering a contract year, so it's probably going to be his last season, barring a massive improvement from him. Whether he can actually win that job as a rookie could be tough. They have done some things in the past, including with Ryan, where they've rotated offensive linemen. It's not something that many teams do, but they'll give an offensive lineman, they'll give one guy a drive, and then they'll give the next guy the next drive. So whether that happens with Belton, or whether specific packages where they really want his bulk in there, or even as a 6th offensive lineman at times, that could get him on the field. But it may well be a move for 2026 and beyond, which is interesting because I think I believe he's 25 years old as a rookie. So it's kind of an interesting move if that's the case.
And then in round 3, they go with TCU receiver Savion Williams, an interesting guy in terms of just size and athleticism. And a lot of what I heard from draft people is that don't expect him to do traditional receiver things, that they're going to have to be, for Williams to be successful in the league, you're going to have a play caller who does creative things to get him the ball in space. Is that how you view him? Is that the role he's going to be? What role do you see him having as in 2025?
Yeah, he's a fascinating player. I mean, he was one I didn't look too much into before the draft, and then watching him after, I mean, there's some really, really exciting stuff there. And I actually think his overall game and the potential he has to do real receiver things has kind of been undersold. I think he's been kind of miscast as this purely gadget kind of player because of how TCU used him the last year or two. But a lot of that was down to the fact TCU, I mean, Savion Williams, he threw some passes. He did everything. He did everything on that offense. He ran the ball a lot. He played wildcat quarterback. And even himself, he said that he had the strongest arm of anyone at TCU. So that's the kind of quarterback they were dealing with over there. So there wasn't a lot of true passing game stuff going on. But when he was allowed to do it, the glimpses were there in terms of he has such suddenness, and he can get open, and he's absolutely huge. I think he's 6'4", 220, and he runs in the 4.4s. He makes ridiculous circus catches down the field. The problem with him, which is again similar to some of the receivers they currently have, his drop issues were, I mean, there's drops, and then there's the kind of drops that Savion Williams has. There's like somewhere it just looks like he has never seen a football before. It's like, what is this thing flying towards me? And he just like can't comprehend what to do with it. But some of the run after the catch stuff, just the innate kind of feel he has for it, and how nimble he is at his size. It's very, very unique. It's a true kind of boom bust type pick, I think. But at the same time, what could get him on the field as a rookie is some of this gadget stuff, because you can build packages into the game, even if he's not going to truly be part of the receiver rotation, because those guys are just so far ahead of him in terms of the route running and things like that, and just being trustworthy enough. You can build stuff to get the ball in his hands into the offense. And obviously they have a creative play caller in Matt LaFleur to be able to do that. So I'm very, very intrigued to see how it goes with him.
Day 3, they go edge two rounds in a row. Round 4, round 5, they get Texas edge Baron Sorrell, Oklahoma State edge Colin Oliver. Then they go defensive interior, Warren Brinson out of Georgia, cornerback Micah Robinson out of Tulane, and offensive lineman John Williams out of Cincinnati. Now, any guys on day 3, is there any sort of impact that they will have in their rookie season?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of the most easy one to say because he was the 4th round pick. But Baron Sorrell, to me, ahead of the draft, was one of the more underrated players in the draft. I mean, the physical profile that he has, he's a great athlete. He had production at a big school in Texas. The character references from everybody that you speak to are absolutely glowing. I don't understand how a pass rusher with all those ingredients lasts until round 4. I really don't. He should have been a day 2 pick. That doesn't mean he's going to be able to come in and start, especially because they seem to really be opening up the runway for Lucas Van Ness to win that job opposite Gary. They want him to have the job as the former 1st round pick. But as a rotational rusher, I think he could be a really kind of just steady presence. He seems like a pro already. So I expect him to kind of be able to have some kind of impact given the opportunity as a rookie.
On next on the Rise Up Series podcast, Best Star Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move forward to the 2025 season. What are reasonable expectations? What is kind of the ceiling and floor? What is coming up this season for Green Bay? That's coming up next on Rise Up Series. We're back on the Rise Up Series podcast, Best Star Cardinals Talk on the Web. Packers enter 2025 as as a team that's viewed as another contender within the NFC. But they do not have an easy schedule to start things off, as they will play their first 2 games against Detroit, and then a Thursday night game at home against the Washington Commanders. They have an early bye week in week 5, and then they also, if you're looking based on last year's schedule, they have a very tough end of the year, as they will play the Ravens in week 17 and be in Minnesota in week 18. When you saw the schedule come out, how did that look for the Packers in terms of, like, we all know the teams they're playing, but the way it played out, how did that schedule look?
Not great, to be honest. I think truly there are very few portions of it, games or weeks or stretches, where you look at it and say this is a real advantage, like a rest advantage over other teams, or this is a real soft spot in the schedule, or it's nice to be able to play this team at this time. There's really not many true positives to be found in that sense, especially for a 3rd place schedule. Like you would think that the benefit of the fact that they only finished 3rd in the division despite winning 11 games was that maybe they'd get a bit of a softer schedule, but it hasn't really worked out that way. I think especially one of the big things down the stretch, they don't play many games at home late in the year, which is obviously what they like to have. They like to bring teams out to Lambeau in the cold weather, and especially kind of, teams that aren't used to that environment. And even the games that they do play at home during the last stretch, I think it's against the Bears and against the Ravens. Right, and the Ravens play outdoors too, and it's not always that warm there. So it's not like this season just gone where they hosted, I think they hosted the Dolphins, 49ers, and the Saints all at Lambeau Field down the stretch, which is, that's kind of the world you want to be living in. So there wasn't a ton there that's kind of that you say, yeah, they lucked out on this or that. They're going to have to earn everything they get this season.
What are sort of expectations for Jordan Love and the Packers in 25? What is viewed as sort of what type of season is expected to be happy with how the team goes? Not like, yes, everyone wants to win the Super Bowl, but what are the reasonable expectations that Packers fans can have for the team this year?
Yeah, I think reasonable expectations for the team as a whole are kind of the playoffs is a non-negotiable. That's that has to be the case. And I think this year the step that everybody is reasonably expecting them to make is to truly, legitimately compete for the division and maybe even win it. I think again, this is a very young team. That's a lot of them are now entering year 3 and year 4, and they've done some really impressive things as young players in the league. But it's kind of time now. The GM even said this after the season. It's about time we got back to competing for championships, not just kind of you make the playoffs, maybe you win a playoff game and then you're out. And that has been the case the last couple of years, which again is nothing wrong with that considering where they were 2 years ago, moving on from Aaron Rodgers. I think with the Lions kind of losing both coordinators, losing some talent, I think there is a realistic expectation that the division could actually be there this year. The Vikings are obviously moving to a first-year starting quarterback. That could go, either way. But I think the expectations are there to legitimately compete for, maybe even win the division. It's been a few years since they did that now. And then obviously to go into the postseason, most importantly, in a position where you feel they can legitimately make a run, that they can do it, they're capable of doing it, which last year, by the time they got to that Eagles game, the level of hope they were actually going to win that game and then win the other games it would take was quite low. So the expectations are higher. And for Jordan Love, I think 2024 was the absolute kind of baseline bottom of what his play should ever be. We've seen higher levels than that, obviously, in 2023. So I think this will be the year, obviously, if he stays healthy, this will be the year, I think, where Jordan Love sets the bar for what kind of player he's going to be going forward. And that could be an MVP level quarterback. We've seen stretches like that. But is it going to be that, or is it going to be some of the inconsistencies that we've also seen? So I think it's going to be a really big year for him. But for the team as a whole, the expectations are pretty high this year.
So we look at worst case, best case. What do you think this team is at its floor, and what do you think the ceiling is for this team?
Yeah, the floor. I mean, I think the floor is very high with this team because I think what they do have, even looking at the other teams in the division, a tremendous amount of depth across a lot of positions. So even if guys go down, I struggle to ever see the bottom falling out for this team. Even if, knock on wood, even if Love went down for a stretch, they've shown they can win games with a backup quarterback. They did it last year. So I think the floor is kind of, I'd be shocked, be stunned truly if they had a losing record. Like even if a lot of stuff went wrong, I would be stunned if they won less than 9 games. The ceiling is probably where you question it, because I think what the big question heading into this season is how many truly elite players do they have on this team? Do they just have a lot of good players? And can any of those players make that step to become elite players? And that will probably define the ceiling. I think in terms of regular season record, you're probably looking at about maybe up to 13 wins. Like that is possible. That's out there for this team. And then you just hope they can kind of hit their stride at the right time entering the postseason. So the ceiling is high, but it's more questionable, I think, than what the floor is.
And then something I like to ask all on these shows is, how do fans view that game against the Cardinals? It is a road game, so they're coming to Arizona for that game. How is that game viewed? The Cardinals as an opponent, is it considered a sure win, a likely win, a toss-up, or a possible loss?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, I would say, especially with it being on the road. I think for Packers fans, it would probably fall between toss-up and likely win. I think obviously there's going to be a confidence there just based on the game last year. Obviously it was in Lambeau, but the game last year, which they won fairly comfortably. Their record against the Cardinals has been fairly strong. I feel like I know the last time they went there, granted it was in the Rodgers days, they did win that one when the Cardinals were really, really flying at that point, and nobody thought the Packers could go in there and win at that time. But I think the thing with the Cardinals that Packers fans are always going to focus on is just the problem that Kyler Murray presents. In terms of his ability to run. I just think that's the first thing that's always going to pop into Packers fans' minds. Even last season, obviously they won the game last season, fairly well, but I don't think they had a sack last year against Murray because it's just so hard. It's so hard to get hold of him. And they kind of, I think they focus more on just don't let him truly take off, and they did a pretty good job of that. But I feel like playing the Cardinals always feels unpredictable, because if you don't have the right plan or you can't contain him in that aspect, then you really put the game at risk immediately. So I think that's kind of going to be the real focus. But I think Packers fans will have a confidence about that game. But obviously it depends, by the time we get to week 7, what kind of shape the Packers are in, and what kind of season the Cardinals are having as well, because they've obviously shown some real potential last season at times as well.
With that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, about our Cardinals Talk Loab, our Packers preview episode, and we'll be back tomorrow with another show, as the Cardinals will go on and play. They have the bye week after the Green Bay game, and followed by playing the Cowboys. So our next show will be our Cowboys preview with Katie Drummond of Cowboys Wire. But Mark, thank you so much for your time. You can obviously find Mark's work on Packers Wire. Are you on social media at all?
I am. I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, just at Mark Oldacres. You can find me over there as well. Putting my opinions out there and whatnot. But yeah, no, thank you so much for the time. Great to talk to you.
All right, that will wrap this show up. That's Mark Oldacres. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again soon with another opponent preview. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!